What do you think is the most common reason people come to the office? If you said fever and cold, congratulations, you're right. But how do you tell if it's just the cold virus or if it's something a little more ominous? Well, that's what we're going to be talking about today on The Buzz with me, Dr. B. Not every kid who has a fever and cold symptoms has to come to the office and get evaluated. Most of the time, this is just going to be caused by a cold virus, and a few days of rest and chicken soup, kid's going to be right back to normal. But how do you tell the difference between this and something more serious that requires an office visit? Well, the rule of thumb that I use is what I call Dr. B's 5-day rule. And the way it works is we look at the symptoms that kids get during colds and during just little febrile illnesses, these fever illnesses. And on the one hand, we look at the symptoms of fever. And on the other hand, we look at the symptoms of cough and cold. And we see how these symptoms change over time. And what you'll see for viruses is that there's a very common pattern. And we can predict where you should be in the illness, basically on which day and when you should be getting better. When things don't follow that typical pattern, that's when we get interested. So let's look first at how fever changes over time during a simple cold. Okay, so you know me, I like graphs and I like to look at things in graph form. It helps to explain how these things progress. And what we have here is a very simple graph. On this side we have symptoms going down the side here, and down here we have days. 0 days, cold just started, we're 5 days in, we're 10 days in, and 21 days into the illness or beyond the illness. And what we're going to look at first is fever. Now, if your child has a simple virus, typically fever is the first symptom that you're going to see. And so let's say the fever starts here at day 0 and the fever goes up. Typically the fever is going to peak around day 2 or 3. And for a simple common cold, that fever should be gone by about day 5. If it's following this kind of pattern, I'm going to actually write fever here so we know what we're looking at. So if the fever goes up, peaks around day 2 or 3, usually it'll go away pretty early, maybe about day 3, but it can last up to about 5 days. If you follow this pattern, then we don't get too excited about this. Oh, the fever's gone, we're doing okay, and it's probably just a simple viral cold. But now let's look at the cold symptoms and put those on the same graph. So, cough, runny nose, scratchy throat, those are the kind of symptoms we're talking about here. And those cold symptoms also typically start pretty early. But like I said, fever is usually the first thing we're going to see with most colds. So those cold symptoms, the cough, runny nose, scratchy throat, watery eyes, all that stuff, usually starts a day or two into it, peaks around day 5, and then should go away, getting better, going away by 14 days. This is a typical pattern for someone with just a viral cold that's going to go away with just some symptomatic care, just giving some Tylenol, rest, and fluids and not worrying too much about it. Unfortunately, simple colds, the cold symptoms can last a couple weeks. But in the end, if you follow this pattern, the fever coming on, peaking around day 2, the cold coming on a little bit later, peaking around day 5, going away by day 14, we don't get too excited about this. Most people come in around day 5. And we'll see people on a Monday, and I'll say, when have you been sick? And everyone who comes in with cold say, well, I've been sick since about Wednesday. Day 5 is where people start to get worried. Maybe the kid had a fever, the fever went away, but now this cold is just peaking. And the people usually think, well, this has just gone on long enough. But like I said, unfortunately, most colds are going to last about 2 weeks. So this pattern is typical for a kid with just the virus. So what gets us excited? What makes us prick up our ears and go, maybe this is not just a simple cold. We got to look into this further. So breaking it down into the 2 types of symptoms again, fever on the one hand, cough and cold symptoms on the other, there's 2 patterns we don't like to see with fevers, and that's persistent fevers and recurrent fevers. So, like we said, fever should go up, come down. What we don't like to see is first persistent fever. The fever goes up and it kind of just stays up beyond 5 days. At that point, we need to start thinking maybe the original infection wasn't a cold, maybe it's something a little more serious. We may want to get blood tests. We may want to get something called a SED rate or a CRP. There's things like this that we can do and see exactly why this fever is going on too long. Many times you will have a virus that can have a prolonged fever, but in this case, you probably want to get it checked out. That's persistent fever, goes on beyond about 5 days. The second thing we don't like with fever is a recurrent fever, which means, yeah, the fever went up, fever came down, we thought everything was fine, maybe the cold's going on for a little while, but then that fever starts to come up again. This is a typical pattern that you'll see with someone who has pneumonia or has an ear infection, bacterial ear infection. The cold's been there long enough that bacteria decide, hey, things are looking good, let's keep the party going, let's cause an ear infection, and the fever comes back because something has worsened. That's what we're talking about with recurrent fever, So persistent or recurrent fever, those are the two symptoms that we don't like to see. So what gets us concerned about the cold and cough symptoms? Now this is actually a pretty easy one. As far as the cold symptoms, the one thing we don't like is if that cold just is not going away. We expect it to go away by 14 days. If that cold is just dragging on and on and on, it's just not going away completely by 14 days, then we start to wonder, maybe some bacteria have moved into the nose, taken up residence, moved into the sinuses, and that's when we start to talk about rhinosinusitis or a sinus infection. In that case, a trial of antibiotics may be helpful, but in healthy kids, it's probably going to take them, if they don't have any sinus problems in the past, they don't have like severe allergies, it's probably going to take them at least 10 to 14 days to develop a true sinus infection. So if you come in, your kid's had a runny nose for 2 or 3 days, we're probably going to say, let's give it a little more time. And the reason we do that is a couple reasons. Number one, we give you the antibiotics too early. They're probably not going to help you. You're going to spend your money, waste your time, and end up with upset stomach or some other problem that we could have avoided. And the second reason is, over time, if a community has some doctors and they keep throwing antibiotics at every cold that comes along, those antibiotics are not going to work very well because the bacteria in that community are going to become resistant. So what we need to do is save these antibiotics for when they're really going to be useful. Now, if you're a very suspicious or astute person, you're going to wonder why 21 is on there. Well, for most kids who are in their first or second year of school or daycare, they're exposed to a lot of colds, they're around a lot of kids, they have that 2 weeks of illness, they're going to have about a 1 week healthy period, and then bam, they're going to get hit with another cold. That usually goes through the whole winter, which means you're going to start all over again. So you'll have a period of illness followed by a short period of healthiness, or at least not big symptoms, and then you're going to start over again. And we'll have parents come in and they'll say, I'm concerned, my kid's been sick all winter. But when you sit down with them and you work out the calendar of when this happened, what you'll find is, well, okay, maybe they're sick for a couple weeks. They had several days where things were actually okay, and then they just got sick again. That's actually fine. This is how the immune system works. The immune system picks up a cold, fights it off, picks up a cold, fights it off. If you're doing that, if your child's doing that, and they're not needing any intervention from us, that's normal and healthy. And over time, that green period, that healthy period, is going to get longer and longer, and there are going to be longer times in between these illnesses. It may take, though, a year or 2 years for that to happen. Is the 5-day rule foolproof? No, it's really for kids who have simple cold symptoms and a fever. If your child has a problem, a very specific problem, like my ear's killing me, my throat is really sore, I'm having trouble swallowing, I'm having trouble breathing, I've got chest pain, anything serious like that, you need to get that checked out by your doctor. Don't depend on a simple lecture that you heard today for those kind of situations. This is just a rule of thumb, a pattern that I've noticed over the last 30 years in medicine. And I thought, boy, this is great. And then what do you know, 2 years ago, someone came out with the same idea, wrote an article about it. I hope they got famous and rich off of it. I didn't, but that's okay. I got to help a lot of people along the way. Well, I hope this brief discussion of fevers and cold symptoms helps you, saves you some time and effort and a lot of worry. Next time we're going to talk about, I think, viruses, bacteria. What are the differences? Why do we treat one? Why do we not treat the other? What can we do in different situations? I think that might be helpful because sometimes people do get a little confused about why we treat some things and why we don't treat some things. If you like what you've been seeing, please subscribe to this channel. If you want to hear this in your car, you can go to Spotify or Amazon Music or Apple Podcasts. We're on all those sites. Please let us know what you think of things. Ask questions. If you want to see a specific lecture, please let me know. I'd love to do one for you. But y'all know me. I'm Dr. B. This has been The Buzz. If I ever forget the name, please call me on that. The Buzz, Parenting and Pediatrics with me, Dr. B. We'll see y'all next time.